4 acceptable body types: skinny ripped, jacked ripped, dad bod, and fat, if you're funny.
What's up, guys? Derek, moreplates.com. Today we're going to be talking about Rob McElhenney's body transformation and exactly what I think went into it. Going back to the beginning, even from the start of the show, Rob is never shown to be, have a muscular physique, show any kind of level of leanness whatsoever. He's gotten thin, but it's more so that quote-unquote skinny fat physique, whereby you just have no visible muscle mass whatsoever, and despite your face being somewhat thin, though your body fitting into normal average person clothes, your abs are completely shrouded in a layer of fat, and you just have no level of muscularity that would otherwise result in some sort of muscle separation. And from the beginning up to his crazy transformation, he has never once gotten in really good shape. He's been, like I said, skinny fat. He's been fat. He's been like obese fat. And even if you look at his shirtless pics way back in season 4, you can see him with the other cast, and he's shirtless here, and he has no better body composition than the other two guys. He looks like he fits in perfectly with these two guys, just the average guy with no muscle separation, no muscularity whatsoever, nothing that would even indicate he works out. Objectively looking at it from anybody's perspective, even like a bodybuilder who does this for a living or somebody who is in the fitness industry who has extremely high standards, no one would argue with the fact that he got in exceptional shape in that transformation. But looking at his baseline in any season prior, he has never been in shape once, and nobody would argue with the fact that he was actually jacked by the end of his transformation, except maybe some people with even more unrealistic expectations than I have. So going throughout the seasons, he goes from just average looking guy to skinny fat to actually fat, and then he intentionally bulks up and cultivates mass to get obese, which hilariously enough, that's actually the exact same excuse that a lot of guys in the bodybuilding industry used when they first got into this stuff. Like I would say the same thing when I was 19 years old and people were saying I was getting fat. I kept saying I didn't say I was cultivating mass, but I'm bulking. It's part of the process. I'm bulking, even though I was like literally 20+% body fat with a head looking like a fucking moon. So this guy gets like actually obese to the point where you would say Danny DeVito looks in better fucking shape than this guy here. So anyways, after that point, he went on a very strict regimen, and talking about how he cultivated his mass, he actually kind of comically refers to how he went about accomplishing such a crazy transformation to get fat prior to him getting shredded.
And I thought that if there was ever going to be a show in which that would make sense, then this would be it. So I embraced it, and I decided to look as terrible as possible. And gaining 50 pounds was a huge part of that.
He goes on to talk about how much he had to pack away for food, and he was getting upwards of 5,000 calories a day.
I wind up eating about 5,000 calories a day.
And then his character essentially goes through a transformation over a short period of time thereafter, where he strips all the fat off and reveals his cultivated mass, which is essentially exactly what everyone that I know, including myself, did when we were younger in our reckless bulking phases, where we eat everything in sight to the point of borderline throwing up and just assuming that food equals muscle. And the higher the scale is, the better.
When should I see the results?
What are you talking about?
Well, when does the spell kick in? When is God going to shed some of this weight for me?
6 weeks.
Great.
So after peaking in obesity and cultivating maximum amounts of mass, he peels down and gets rid of all the fat and actually recomps pretty substantially and gains a significant amount of muscle in the process. And he basically elaborates in this post here, look, it's not that hard. All you need to do is lift weights 6 days a week, stop drinking alcohol, don't eat anything after 7 p.m., don't eat any carbs or sugar at all. In fact, just don't eat anything you like. Get the personal trainer from Magic Mike, sleep 9 hours a night, run 3 miles a day, and have a studio pay for the whole thing over a 6 to 7 month span. I don't know why everyone's not doing this. It's a super realistic lifestyle and an appropriate body image to compare oneself to. So obviously this guy is hilarious. He adds a huge comedy factor to this transformation, but just objectively looking at it, you have to keep in mind the time frame here, 6 to 7 months for this guy to go from untrained, who in his entirety of his life has never once shown any substantial amount of muscle mass, let alone gotten lean before. And while getting lean is impressive, showing muscle separation, this is the thing that everyone, the beach body is achieved through diet essentially, as well as training. But I mean, the actual adherence to a tightly regulated diet model is what is actually going to get you a body composition like this, which is why he pretty much elaborates on how he feels like he starved himself for this transformation. But you have to keep in mind here, he gained a significant amount of muscle in the 6 to 7 month time span, and he's 40 plus years old. Throughout the entirety of this guy's acting career, in his late 20s, his 30s, he's never looked anywhere close to this, and he certainly is not capable of supporting muscle mass accrual like this in such a short time frame while simultaneously peeling like 30 to 40 pounds of fat off his body. Like, it's just insane that anyone would even question if this is natural or not. And I think he knows how unrealistic it is, which is why he tries to add comedy to every time the question arises. And just looking at this guy, like, this is a physique that even guys that juice for years often don't achieve. You know, you'll see guys at the gym who do take gear, and they've been taking gear for years, cycling on and off, blasting and cruising, guys abusing dosages higher than actual bodybuilders, and they'll, you know, barely even achieve a physique like this in their lifetime simply because they don't have the genetics for it, as well as they don't really know what they're doing. But Rob obviously has pretty damn good genetics to achieve this in 6 to 7 months, in my opinion, after coming off of just a brutal bulk where he just puts himself in the worst position possible. He's probably insulin resistant. He's eating way too much fucking food. He's fat as hell. He has no muscle on his frame. He's like pretty much untrained. It's 40 plus years old with declining endogenous androgen production. He has to somehow pack on muscle while simultaneously peeling off 40 plus pounds of fat. There's just no fucking way that you could do it naturally. So even on gear, this is an impressive transformation, and nobody would look at this and not say he looks good. Like, even guys with really unrealistic expectations, including myself, would look at this and say, look, he's got like veins crawling up his abs here. Like, he's single digit body fat percentage while still holding a decent amount of size, for especially considering the time frame he trained for. And at the end of the day, you know, you could say, oh, I have like a celebrity trainer, but at the end of the day, all you need to do is get in the fucking gym and train with progressive overload and perform the exercises correctly. You know, you do like 3, 4, 5 exercises per body part, something like that, 3 to 4 sets, hit a certain amount of reps, progressive overload, deploy it on every workout, try to get stronger as you go, eat enough protein, hit your calorie allotment, get your micronutrient intake in. It's not rocket science. Everyone can do the exact same thing, yet there are only certain individuals who can achieve insane transformations like this, especially at 40 plus years old, and they are limited to guys on gear 99% of the time, and this is one of those cases. This is a body composition anybody would be happy with, and the reason it's not sustainable, and he jokes about that, is not because you have to be on gear to sustain it. It's that the diet model you have to adhere to is just ridiculous, and no one can stay on this diet model year round. And this is why after this transformation he regresses a bit, and you can see his physique starts to get a bit softer, and people ask him in this video, where are the abs, Rob? And then he basically comments on why they're gone.
Where are the abs, Rob? I'm going to give you a little lesson in biology. The abs are always there. They're in there. They're just behind a bunch of tacos and tequila. I was enjoying myself on vacation. The abs are there, and the second I want those abs to come back, all it takes is 3 to 4 months of starving myself.
So there he, again, comically refers to how he gets in shape and starving himself, which obviously isn't accurate, but from somebody going from a 5,000 calorie a day diet, eating junk all the time, to restricting yourself to 2,500, 2,400 calories, probably even less in his case, by the peak of his leanness. I don't know exactly what he was eating, but it was obviously at least half of what he was eating prior. That is going to be difficult to adhere to. You know, restricting yourself of food when you've been getting used to eating pizza and fucking chips every day, trying to get as fat as possible, is difficult to transition. Like, I'll do a complete 180, going from eating whatever you want in junk food to eating 100% clean for 6 to 7 months straight. Eventually your leptin and growth ghrelin levels are going to auto-regulate to the point where you're craving stuff again. The first couple months are a lot easier and the fat just falls off, but as you start to restrict further and further and you get sub 3,000 calories, you're down to 2,700, you're down to 2,600, you're training 5-6 days a week, you have a decent amount of muscle on your frame that's eating up that fuel, it's going to get to a point where no person can not be hungry when they're getting to single digit body fat percentage, unless they're walking around on amphetamines every day or using cocaine or some crazy appetite suppressant. So this guy talking about how he starves himself, I highly doubt he actually starved himself unless his celebrity trainer was an idiot, but he probably was eating significantly less than he was used to for the time frame prior where he cultivated all the mass. So again, it's not the reason he says he can get back to that so easily though isn't inaccurate, because I believe he is still on gear. I just don't think that he is eating in a way that is going to support losing as much fat as he had in that transformation. A lot of people would assume, oh, you have to be on gear to look like that. But in reality, it's the diet model that gets you that lean, not the gear. The gear is going to increase your muscle mass. It's going to help you burn more fat at rest, blah, blah, blah. But at the end of the day, getting lean, if you're eating too much food, you're never going to get there. So, and this is why in 2019, he still has a pretty damn good physique in season 14. Less mass, more grace. Here, he is not shredded. He's probably 14, 15% body fat here, but you can still see the development in the arms, the delts, the chest. This guy has a good physique now, and he is 42 years old currently. So he didn't really lose much size at all. In fact, I think he pretty much retained the majority of it. He's just eating way more food now, or enough food now, that he can't sustain a single digit body fat percentage year round, which realistically no one really can except for the most strict and regimented individuals whose life essentially revolves around being in shape, largely because they are a social media influencer in the fitness industry, or they're a coach who's trying to set a good example, or whatever the reason is. He's not going to walk around eating the same diet model that got him shredded in that 6 to 7 month time frame for the rest of his life. It's not sustainable for him. So this is why he's gained a decent amount of fat after the transformation, but he still looks, jacked to average person perspective, and puts this guy to shame beside him here. And for a 42-year-old, any reasonable person would say this is a muscular physique. And the fact that in his decade prior of walking around and probably eating a similar diet, he looked skinny fat, and now he's not, it just goes to show that he's probably still using the exact same thing, or at least a therapeutic quote-unquote replacement dose of testosterone at this point. So here again, a more recent picture, and he looks solid. The guy isn't shredded, but you can see a borderline visible outline of his abs. He still has good mass on his arms, his delts, his chest. He has good size everywhere. The guy is still muscular and hasn't really lost anything. He's just holding more fat than he was in the peak of his transformation, where he was probably eating low end of the 2000s in calories, if not less, because some guys who don't really know how to diet are going to crash diet their guys on sub 2000 calories to achieve a transformation like this. And either way, it's typically not sustainable. Even if you're in the low 2000s, it's going to be pretty difficult to adhere to that year round and maintain this body composition, which is exactly why he looks like this now. And he's holding, 14, 15% body fat, but he is still jacked. And it's funny because he's actually friends with our good friend Kumail Nanjiani, who goes on an interview with Dax Shepard and elaborates on body transformations. And some of this stuff is actually pretty interesting. But before we get into some of the snippets from that, I wanted to bring up the times where Rob essentially alluded to steroid use.
It depends. I'm going to say I enjoy watching men and women take themselves to the outer limits of what the human body can do. And so I'm going to say in.
So in this interview, he basically goes over certain topics and says if he's in or out, I guess if it's like if he approves of it or disapproves of it, or if he was into it or not. And when steroids is brought up, he says he's into it. So, or he's in. So that in itself obviously strongly reinforces the likelihood that he was willing to subject himself to exogenous anabolics during that transformation. In addition to that, in his interview with Conan, he basically says to achieve a transformation in a short time frame, you can inject yourself with steroids.
That's going to be a problem.
Really?
I mean, there's certain things you can inject into your body. Unfortunately, you also have to work out and change your diet and do all sorts of different things.
So there he basically says what I just elaborated on how even if you take gear, you still have to, diet and train, because either, regardless if you're slamming juice all day, you're not going to get leaner unless you clean up the diet. You can support some growth, obviously, but it's not going to be optimal, and you need to put that stimulus on your body to actually support and give it a reason to grow in the first place. It's not going to adapt to progressive overload unless you actually put that progressive overload on yourself and give your body the stimulus and a reason to grow. And as well as the diet, if you don't have sufficient fuel to actually support the growth and the fat loss itself by eating less than you expend, you're not going to either grow muscle if that's your goal, or lose fat if you're trying to restrict your body of less macronutrients than it expends on a daily basis. And he's well aware of this, obviously, as he had to implement this pretty strictly over the past however long of a time frame. And he's probably sticking to that regimen with a bit more leniency now, but he's still following the same approach clearly, as he's maintained a very good body composition throughout the year plus after this transformation was accomplished. And here he goes on to talk about the trainer he hired in order to complete this body transformation from Magic Mike.
I have the ideal male body that I'm trying to achieve, and I already know what it is. And I said, oh, really? What is it? He goes, Brad Pitt Fight Club.
Yeah.
And I was like, God damn it, you're right. It's Brad Pitt Fight Club.
So just the fact that he's talking about how the goal physique was Brad Pitt Fight Club, and he clearly exceeded that in muscularity and was comparable in body composition from a leanness standpoint, just further solidifies the fact that this was not naturally achieved. Like, the guy went from completely untrained skinny fat physique to obese to way more jacked than Brad Pitt Fight Club in 6 to 7 months with no prior experience whatsoever, and just completely morphing his physique with a relatively normal working out schedule. No crazy factors changed. Nobody in 6 to 7 months of newbie gains is going to support a 5+ year body transformation like this. Like, if somebody was to do this naturally, even in their 20s, they would need at least a few years for an average person. And even then, they probably still wouldn't end up looking like this. And for him to have accomplished it in 6 to 7 months is just, with the guy who, is comparing the goal in mind to Brad Pitt Fight Club. Brad Pitt Fight Club was like 160, 170 pounds. He was lean, but he was small because he had to get shredded when you're natural, and you're not somebody who is training year round around the clock to maintain a high level of muscularity. You're going to sacrifice a lot of size, or I guess mass in just a general sense, because you're going to strip a lot of fat off of your extremities and whatnot too. So you're going to end up with skinny arms, skinny legs, skinny body composition in general, but you'll be shredded, but you'll be thin. Whereas Rob, on the other hand, is still muscular and holding a decent amount of size while simultaneously being borderline single digits with fucking veins sticking out of his abs. So I think it's pretty obvious at this point the whole thing was not naturally achieved. As far as what he took in particular, though, we get a bit more insight into that when you listen further into the Men's Health interview he did.
And as you go to your physician 2 to 3 times a week just to monitor all your testosterone levels, because testosterone is important to building muscle.
So that's pretty much all he touches on that point, but why would you talk about going to your doctor to check your testosterone levels if you were natural? Nobody's going to be doing that. Nobody who's naturally doing this transformation would be going to get a blood test a couple times a week. If anything, this suggests that he has some sort of high profile, probably wellness clinic that celebrities go to a lot and is well known or whatever, and they paid for it, and he basically went to visit the doctor and get bi-weekly testosterone replacement therapy injections or something like that. That's what I am gathering from this. There's no other reason he would even if you were doing that, you'd probably self-administer it at home. I don't know why you would go into the doctor to do that unless you were that needle shy or that not confident in your ability to administer correctly. But the fact that he's even stating this at all, go to the doctor to check your testosterone, it's like, come on, dude. Like, you're clearly getting advised to go to some sort of wellness clinic, some sort of celebrity physician that is liberal enough to prescribe testosterone to actors to support these transformations. The likelihood is that he probably went to a wellness clinic based on the fact that they have more leniency in their dosing protocols, and they're actually willing to go upwards of 300 milligrams a week that I've seen in the States, which is honestly kind of crazy because most guys are not going to need that therapeutically. And for most people, that would be, for 99.9% of people, that would be a super physiological dose and a pretty substantial cycle. Now, maybe to some people that might seem like a low dose, isn't a cycle, 500 milligrams minimum. In reality, 300 milligrams, you're only producing 3 to 10 milligrams on average per day naturally through your endogenous androgen production. And at 42, it certainly isn't on the high end of that 3 to 10 milligram range. So this guy naturally is probably producing like 4 or 5 milligrams of test per day as a natural, which adds up to 35-ish milligrams per week. And the minimum therapeutic dose you're going to get even for hormone replacement that's going to put you on the high end of the reference range is typically going to be 100, 150 milligrams. And then some of these clinics that are super lenient are going to push guys upwards of 300 milligrams and qualify it as therapeutic, despite the fact that your total testosterone level is clearing 2,000 nanograms plus and your free testosterone is through the fucking roof. So I think that this guy probably had a very good connection to a wellness clinic that had him on legal steroids, essentially. And in this interview with, like I said earlier, Kumail Nanjiani, they get into some of the details about how they've been able to sustain their physiques, achieving it, the work that goes into it, the work that goes into sustaining it now, and how it's so easy now to get back into shape after getting in shape the first time.
But it'll come back fast.
That's true.
That's the thing. Like, so I stopped, and then, in fact, for my other show, I thought maybe I'll gain a bunch of weight again, just because I feel like this character might be a little overweight. And then I really couldn't do it. And then I was like, well, maybe I'll just see if I can get back into shape. And instead of it taking 4 months, it took like 3 weeks, and I could get right back into shape, which is wild.
It's interesting that you said that. It's really true. There's a 3-week sweet spot where you're like, I'm super relaxed. I'm not working out as hard. I look the fucking same. I look great. This is the rest of my life.
Which honestly is just the biggest red flag in itself, that they're both still on at least optimized levels of therapeutic testosterone replacement therapy to support their physiques after their peaked transformations. And the only reason it would be easy to support these body compositions and get back into shape whenever they want at the drop of a hat within a few weeks is because they have that base level foundation of muscle mass that they've built throughout their hormone use to support that expenditure of calories and maintain that muscularity.
As kids, we're all roughly the same age.
Yeah.
And so as I was leading up to this interview, I was kind of thinking, we did grow up in a unique time period. So we grew up in the era of heavy steroid use, where Mr. Universe went from 178 pounds to 250, right? The era of Schwarzenegger and Lou Ferrigno. And now those guys were in our movies when we were kids. So we were, I want to say, one of the first generations to be introduced to this body type that is preposterous by all measures.
Yeah.
That's right.
And that must have played some role subconsciously or psychologically.
So in that part of the podcast, Dax and Rob and Kumail essentially touch on how their physique aspirations were heavily inspired by role models in their youth that were heavy steroid users, and that, you know, not so subtly implies that they very likely acknowledged the likelihood that they would need to deploy exogenous androgen use at some point in their lives to achieve comparable physiques to whatever their dream physique it was that they aspired to in their youth. And the nail in the coffin on this whole thing really is later in the podcast when Rob essentially actually admits to testosterone replacement therapy.
One thing that I didn't even realize wasn't happening, this is a benefit, I think it's a benefit, but one thing I didn't even realize wasn't happening from the ages of about 14 till about 37, a man every single day wakes up with an erection.
Right.
Every single day.
Okay.
And then you kind of, I forgot. Like it just goes away. But then all of a sudden I'm increasing my testosterone back to what I was like when I was 20. And then the next thing I know, I'm waking up every day and I'm like, oh, what's this?
Yeah.
Wow, this is fun.
Yeah.
Right. I remember this was what it was like for 30 years. And then I started to get depressed for a quick second. Was like, I could have done this at any point. When I was in my 20s, when my testosterone was like levels were like they are in their 20s, I could have done this and I didn't.
So there, Rob literally says he increases testosterone levels, and while he doesn't literally word for word say he visited a doctor to get a prescription for exogenous testosterone use, it's pretty damn obvious at this point that he, at minimum, restored his testosterone levels to that of a healthy young male in his 20s, because that's exactly what he just said he did, which would probably involve at minimum 150 milligrams of testosterone per week. I think the likelihood is very high as well that he at least acutely push that into super physiological territory to peak for that transformation in It's Always Sunny to achieve that crazy before and after. And then thereafter, he probably lowered his dose down to a therapeutic replacement amount, which puts him closer to the high end of normal for hormone wellness optimization, whereby his levels are closer to 1,000 nanograms per deciliter-ish with a free on the high end of normal, or maybe slightly above that. Doesn't really matter. Just the fact that he is essentially admitting to using testosterone, and I think the likelihood is high for that muscle accrual phase where he's packed on a significant amount of lean tissue in a heavy deficit at that, just further reinforces the likelihood that it was probably upwards of 300 milligrams throughout the insane transformation portion and around 150-ish milligrams thereafter to sustain his physique and hold on to his foundation of tissue and support high level physiologic function thereafter, equivalent to that of a 20-something-year-old with high normal endogenous androgen production. So anyways, let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. I don't think there's really any debate at this point based on all the hints this guy's dropped, including pretty much blatantly saying it in this podcast. But what do you think he didn't do? All comments really help the algorithm, so it's much appreciated when you guys like and comment. Please hit the notification bell, as well as follow me on Instagram at moreplates_more_dates, Facebook, Snapchat, BitChute, Twitter, TikTok, Apple Podcasts, wherever I am. Also, I highly recommend you subscribe to the mailing list. First link in the description below. Anytime I publish an article on more elaborate deep dive topics related to bodybuilding pharmacology, performance enhancing drugs, anything related to pharmacology and performance enhancement in general, those articles will get sent to you over email right as soon as those articles go live. So I highly recommend you subscribe to that if you aren't, because those articles are far more elaborate deep dives than my videos and have clinical studies and any kind of scientific references I detail in my videos but don't actually hyperlink in the videos for you to delve into yourself for your own individual research if it interests you. So thank you guys for watching. Talk to you soon.